button now.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the local review body of the 23rd of June. My name is Councillor Henry Anderson. I'm convener of the local review body. With me today is Councillor Callum Purvis and also Councillor Richard Waters, and we will be the councillors on the review body for the decisions for today. Also with us is Mr. Harrison, Planning Advisor to the LRB, who is not part of the planning department and has no previous involvement in any of the applications before us today. Also with us is Mr. Colin Elliott, who is our legal advisor, and Mr. Williams from Committee Services. Before I go on to the business, I would like to do a tribute to the LRB's first convener, who was the late Councillor Bob Band, who after a brave battle for 18 months, lost his fight with stomach cancer in late March. Bob was the first convener, as I said, of the local review body that began in 2009, and he held the post until May 2012. He then moved on to become convener of lifelong learning. Bob was a good friend and colleague who had the ability to work with fellow councillors and officers in a friendly and professional manner. He was Deputy Provost for a time and proved to be a great ambassador for Perth and Kinross Council, and his wise words and guidance will be sadly missed by all that knew him. Often it's been referred to that Bob would sit in the corner of the lounge reading his papers for meetings, and he was always available to give anyone that wanted some advice or help on the process. He was there regardless of what political parties, to give them some friendly guidance, and this was the way Bob was. Once COVID-19 is behind us, we hope that there'll be a memorial service for the life of Councillor Bob Band. Thank you. Now we will, firstly, we will go to the minutes of the 3rd of March. Is everyone happy to note that the minutes for the 3rd of March?
Yes, convener.
Yes,
Councillor Waters?
Yes, happy to note them.
Now, can I ask if there's any of the councillors present have any declarations of interest to make? Councillor Purvis?
No declarations of interest to make, convener.
Councillor Waters?
No declaration of interest.
Right. Can I ask that everyone has their devices on silent mode, so that we have no mobile phones interrupting? And now we will carry on to the business of the day. And the first business 4.1 is a dwelling house in Murray Place, Stanley. Mr. Harrison, can you take over?
Thank you, convener. Yes, as you say, this is a planning application in principle for the erection of a dwelling house at land 30 metres northwest of 37 Percy Street by Murray Place in Stanley. The application site extends to some 11 metres by 45 metres. It contains a single open-fronted single-storey brick building with a metal roof. Access is off Murray Place at the eastern end. The ground is currently used for parking and access to the rear gardens of the adjoining houses on both Murray Place and Percy Street. There is also a drying green area at the western end. Indicative plans have been submitted with the original planning application, and further revised and more detailed indicative drawings and images have been submitted as new information with the notice of review. And I'll just take you through some photographs now, which hopefully you're able to see at your end, as it were. But you might like to have page 29 onwards, provide you with a location plan and site plan. And the second indicative plans that I mentioned are illustrated on page 45 onwards. The general sequence of the photographs will be views from Percy Street to start off with, then moving round into Murray Place, then the access into the application site, and then views of the application site from the side and rear boundaries. So just taking you to the first photograph now, this is showing the frontage of Percy Street on its corner with Murray Place, looking in a westerly direction. And as you'll see, the photographs have a number of arrows in blue at each side, either going to one side or the other, or further up and down the street. So just following the general direction of the arrows, we move to the second photograph, and that shows us the entrance into Murray Place and also the application site itself, just indicatively further up that street. You can also pick out the backs of the Murray Place houses in more or less a white render and grey roofs, just to orientate yourself. Swinging round to the next photograph on the right, again, we see the corner of Percy Street and Murray Place. Going back again and onto the next photograph, we look up Murray Place towards the site frontage, and you'll see a red line there just indicating where that is on that left-hand side of the road as you go up. From there we go up Murray Place in the next photograph, and we see the backs of the Murray Place houses lying to the north. You're also catching the corner of the application site, and I'll maybe just draw your attention to the fact that there is a path allowed for in the application between the hedge and the red line you see there. The next photograph swings slightly to the left of that, and that shows the open-fronted shed building, which we understand has been used as a garage in the past. It also shows the main part of the site as seen from Murray Place, looking in a westerly direction, but also it starts to introduce you to some of the accesses serving the houses on Percy Street on the left-hand side of that photograph. And if we move slightly to the left of that photograph, looking in, as it were, in the next photograph, we see those accesses onto the Percy Street properties, looking in that southwesterly direction from Murray Place a little more clearly. From there, we move into the application site in the next photograph and look back to the entry onto Murray Place. And we're catching the corner of the brick building at the same time. In the next photograph, swinging slightly to the right of that, we see that elevation of the brick building, looking right down, as it were, the full length of the application site and in a westerly direction. And of course, we're catching the back properties on Murray Place at the same time. And you're starting to pick up some of the extensions there that are referred to in the papers. So from that position, we move up the application site, as it were, in the next photograph. First of all, just to note a difference in levels between the existing garage and the parking area, which tends to be to the west of that in that photograph. Swinging slightly to the right in the next photograph, we see the rear elevations and the extensions I mentioned on Murray Place. You also notice that there's an access path reservation being allowed for along that northern boundary. From there we move up the application site slightly, again just to look in slightly more detail at the back of Murray Place and that rear extension. And then swinging round to the right of that photograph, we look down the rear elevations of Murray Place and that reservation I mentioned before. And you may also notice some triangle poles in the ground in that photograph too. In the next photograph, we swing slightly to the right again, and we see the full length of the application site and the clear indication of the extent to which it's used for parking by local residents at present. In the next photograph, swinging round to the right again, we now look at the back boundary onto the properties on Percy Street. And swinging round again to the right in the next photograph, we see that rear western elevation of the application site and the gardens beyond. So moving on to the next photograph, that just leaves you with the general photograph of the site as seen from the Murray Place entrance. Moving now in summary to the applicant's case. This is a brownfield site within a residential area where infill development is generally supported, as this enables an efficient use of land. The development of the site would improve the amenity of the locality. Consequently, the proposal is seen as complying with Local Development Plan Policy RD1. Policy PM1A concerns the potential impact of a development in terms of its design, density, siting, on the character and amenity of the area. The planning officer has indicated that the site is large enough to accommodate a house, therefore the density is considered to be acceptable. Information regarding the height, style and design was submitted with this planning application in principle. It is accepted that there would be no detriment to the properties in Percy Street. The officer is concerned about the impact on privacy and overlooking on the Murray Place properties. The indicative proposals illustrated in Appendix 3 have been submitted in response to this concern to show that a house could be built without impacting on the existing extensions which are in closest proximity to that northern boundary. This also shows a stepping down from a 2 to a 1-storey form on that northern side. This is seen as addressing any concerns regarding potential loss of light to the Murray Place properties. The house could be designed to ensure no overlooking from windows into adjoining properties. A communal footpath would be reserved along the northern boundary to provide pedestrian access to the Murray Place houses. It is not considered that there is a specific building pattern in this locality, and the indicative drawings are seen as showing that a suitable development could be achieved. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling, the existing development is characterised by 2 rows of housing running east-west with rear boundaries backing onto this linear site. In that context, the proposal is not viewed as reflecting the pattern of development in the locality. It is recognised that the site is large enough to accommodate a dwelling. Windows could be orientated east to west, and the amenity of the Percy Street properties would not be adversely affected as they enjoy generous gardens. However, the houses on Murray Place are in close proximity, and the existing extensions would be within 9 metres of the proposed plot boundary. This is not seen as providing an acceptable degree of separation. It is considered that there would be a loss of privacy and a degree of overlooking between the existing houses and the proposed site. It is noted that the site is extensively used for access and parking for the adjoining houses at present. Any rights in that context are a civil matter and not a material planning consideration. In conclusion, the proposal is considered to be contrary to the former Local Development Plan policies RD1 and PM1A. In the current Local Development Plan 2, the equivalent policies are Policy 17, Residential Areas, and Policy 1A, Placemaking. Turning to representations, there have been 10 representations received, mainly expressing concerns regarding the loss of parking and open space, the adverse impact on amenity, sunlight and privacy, and road safety. In this instance, there is both a request for a site visit and a request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Now, has Councillor Waters got any questions for Mr. Harrison?
I do, thank you. I've got a couple of questions, Convener. Just regarding the ownership of the property, especially in relation to, as we see on at the back gardens of the houses on Percy Street, where we see driveways that are obviously built onto the coming out onto the land. Do we have any information on the rights they have regarding that? Is the first question I have. And the second one is just looking for a bit of confirmation regarding the access path that they're proposed to access the back of the houses on Murray Place. Given this is an in principle application, but also taking into account, I assume that the path is shown in this picture has been out with the application's area. I assume that means that we were minded to pass this application, that wouldn't be in principle the idea that they have access to the back of their houses with this path, given that they've created it out with the planning application, but it's actually in the plan. They're right in their intention of doing that.
Right. To answer your first question first, as it were, in terms of rights, there are references to, shall we say, assumed rights by one or two of the people who have made representations. I'd maybe draw your attention to page 57, where the person makes representation and also includes a plan as well, and basically suggests that there is a right of access as far as his view is. But I can only stress again that any, shall we say, interpretation of rights of access would really be a civil matter rather than a planning matter for you today, as it were. Turning, hopefully that's helpful. Turning to the question of the question of a reservation of a footpath, obviously the applicant has declared that fairly clearly, and obviously defined his application site, excluding the land from the footpath. So if you were minded to grant consent effectively for the change of use of the land to a residential use from what we understand may be, shall we say, a slightly mixed use. As you can see, there's been a garage there. The suggestion is it might even have been a commercial garage, but there seems to have been some residential use of the area historically, if only in terms of what you see with the clothes poles. But if you were confirming that, as it were, as part of this application, it would only relate to the application site. So the strip of land on that northern boundary is being out with the application site would be a separate matter altogether and wouldn't be seen as part of the plot, if I can put it that way. Hopefully that's of some assistance.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Purvis, have you got any questions on this development?
Thank you, Convener. Just a couple of questions, if I may. Perhaps some for Mr. Harrison and some for Mr. Elliott. The first one is about the design and location of the property or the proposed property. I'm just wanting to clarify, is the plans that we've got at page 45, is that part of the new information that was submitted and not with the original application?
That's correct. The plans on page 45, 46 and 47 are all new information.
Okay, and in the original report of handling, the officer talks about the location specifically of the property, concerns about the proximity to the houses on Murray Place. Is it? Yeah, Murray Place. Does the change to the location, and I'm not sure to what extent you're able to give a view on this, does the change to the location in the indicative plans, and obviously they're still indicative plans, does that address those concerns that were raised by the officer in that report of handling?
Well, certainly shall we say, the change in the indicative plans, which involved, in simple terms, a migration of the house approximately 6 metres closer to the Murray Place end, that's the Murray Place access end of it, draws the proposal further away from the extensions on the back of the houses in Murray, on the back of Murray Place. Now, certainly, the sort of distances would basically give approximately 9 meters separation between the prospective, I can put it that way, rear elevation of the suggested house, as you see on page 45. It certainly draws it away significantly from those two extensions at the western or far end, as it were, of the Murray Place properties. So it definitely improves the position, and it's really a matter of judgment for yourself as to whether or not you feel a house could be accommodated in that locality sufficiently without affecting those Murray Place properties, but recognising at the same time by pulling the property further towards Murray Place, you are limiting or reducing the amount of land available to the proposed house in terms of its parking and turning facility.
Okay, thank you for that. And just on the parking issue again, I know that Councillor Waters has already touched on this. I know it's not a planning consideration in terms of rights of access or loss of parking, but I know that when we look at other applications, major applications, for example, we're always assessing whether there is sufficient parking there. So while those are not a planning consideration, is it a planning consideration? Is displacement of cars and vehicles a planning consideration? The fact that by removing these spaces, that might cause a problem elsewhere, or is that not something that should be considered either?
Well, clearly in practical terms, yes, the displacement of parking would result in parking on street almost certainly to a greater degree than is present there. That is to some extent a planning consideration. However, it has to be recognised that depending on the civil situation, the owner of the ground could, of course, close off that ability for residents to park there if they have no entitlement to do so. So that is something which potentially, and I stress the word potentially, might happen irrespective of the outcome of the application. But certainly, in broad terms, the overall impact of a development on parking in a locality is a consideration which would, as you rightly point out, normally be taken into account to some degree, albeit in this instance that would be something which may not even be within, shall we say, something the council can influence through this planning application.
Okay, thank you. And just finally, I wonder whether either you or Mr. Elliott could give greater clarity on the policy position in terms of infill developments. Obviously, the applicant has suggested that it meets those criteria. I'm just wondering what specifically is the requirement fully to meet with that.
I'll just see if I can get something a little bit more to hand then on that point. Just give me a moment. The first, should we say, aspect I would maybe mention is it's basically because the site lies within a residential area, it's very much a question of judgment as to whether infill does or doesn't cause, should we say, an issue of amenity or privacy or overlooking in relation to other properties, and it's a very subjective decision rather than suggesting that there is should we say, a list of rules which you can just apply automatically. So really, it's a combination of things. If you went through them as to whether or not, for example, a building would cause issues of privacy. In this particular instance, the issue of density doesn't seem to be an issue, and that would be one of the considerations for infill development, as would the issue of overlooking potentially or overshadowing. The difficulty we have here is that we don't have a detailed proposal which would allow an assessment of the degree of whether it's loss of privacy or overshadowing. That would only come at a later date. So the sort of the decision you have before you is to decide whether or not you think, in broadest terms, the site could reasonably accommodate a dwelling house without automatically leading to problems of overlooking or overshadowing, recognising there doesn't seem to be a problem of density.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Purvis. Now, I'm going to read this out and then I'll ask both you how you feel, how we will proceed. Members, can we proceed to determine the application for review based on the information that is before us? That is information contained within the papers and the presentation of the planning advisor. Councillor Purvis, are you happy to proceed?
Yes, I think so.
Thank you. Councillor Waters, are you happy to proceed?
Happy to proceed, convener.
And I am happy to proceed as well. So we will now move to debate, and I will take the lead on this. And I've read all these papers quite a few times, and I've looked at the photographs. And though this is the way the virtual meetings will have to go, and I can clearly see by the photographs and that there is issues with this application. There's issues over privacy, overlooking, and even with the moving of the building 9 meters, it seems to be very close. I know displacement of parking isn't a major thing, but this is another issue that we have here. And of course, it doesn't match with the pattern of existing properties. So with all these issues, my opinion is that I would support the planning department in refusing this appeal. Now I'll hand over to Councillor Purvis for his views on it.
Thank you, convener. I think I am in agreement with you on this issue. I am concerned about the proximity that any house in that area would have to the neighbouring properties, as well as concerns about overlooking and privacy that you have already outlined. While it is accepted that the density of having one property on the site could probably be accommodated, it would be very difficult to accommodate it within the site without addressing those issues, which I think are important for us to consider. So I think that the inclusion of any house on this site would lead to a loss of residential amenity and would not positively contribute to the character of the area. So I'm happy to agree, convener, with you and support the reasons for refusal that have been set out by the planning authority if they are updated to reflect the current policy position, possibly with the loss of the word density in both.
Thank you, Councillor Purvis. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener. I'm going to concur with both my colleagues here. I think it is a property here will affect the amenity. I'm quite happy from the amenity of the residents in Percy Street, but specifically Murray Place. I have real issues, as have been expressed by both my colleagues regarding their amenity. So I will agree that on officers' reason for refusal is be upheld with the slight amendment to the density. I'm happy with that, and potentially, just from my perspective, and I don't know what my colleagues, but it really is specifically in relation to the amenity of the residents in Murray Place rather than Percy Street. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Elliott, it's unanimous that this appeal has been dismissed, and we support the planning department. We need to change policy in number 1 to policy 17, and we need to replace number 2 to policy 1A and remove I've lost my place now, but there's a word to be removed. If someone could remind me. You mentioned it, Councillor Purvis.
Density.
Yes. Are you happy with that, Mr. Elliott?
And Councillor Waters also suggested adding at number 1 after existing dwellings about on referencing specifically Murray Place, I think. Yes,
Murray Place is the key area that would be impacted if this development was to have been accepted.
If you are both happy with that.
Yep, I'm happy with that. Are you happy with that, Councillor Purvis?
Yes, I'm happy to concur.
Thank you. Mr. Elliott, have you got all that?
I think you're on mute, Mr. Elliott.
That better?
Yes.
Yes, I don't know what happened there. That didn't actually press mute, it's dropped off to mute. Now, thank you, Convener. Just to be clear, this won't be seen online, but on page 43 of your papers is the original decision notice. Now, I want to be clear, my understanding of what you've agreed on grounded refusal number 1, your first line, you're changing policy RD1 to policy 17.
Yes. You
haven't quite fully mentioned it, but of course, line 1 onto line 2, you need to change the reference Perth Kinross Local Development Plan 2014. That becomes Local Development Plan 2, and then brackets 2019.
Right.
Then a couple of lines below what Councillor Purvis said it and Councillor Waters, existing dwellings. Added in there would be proximity to existing dwellings on Murray Place, Stanley. So you're seeing what it's proximate to. Then on to ground 2, simple changes. First line, policy PM1A becomes 1A, that's the update. Second line, again, the update would be Perth Kinross Local Development Plan 2 in brackets 2019. And the last change, my understanding is on the same line, the word density comes out.
Yes.
Okay, if members are content with that, then it's refused on those lines.
Yes.
Could I possibly mention something here, Convener?
Yes.
I appreciate you referred to density there. I'm looking at the 3 options of design, density and siting. Because this is an outline planning application, in other words, the plans you have are solely indicative. I didn't know whether or not you wish to give any consideration to whether or not the word design should be in there, because strictly speaking, you don't have a specific design in front of you. In a formal sense, the drawings you have are solely indicative. It's solely a matter for you to decide, but I thought I should draw that to your attention.
Yes, I think design would be inappropriate.
Convener, just to comment on that, I'm happy to agree to that as well. I think the specific issue was about the ability to site a property in that site. Helpful use of language, but in that area without causing the problems that we've outlined in our reasons for refusal.
Councillor Waters, are you happy with that?
I'm happy with the recommendation.
Right. So therefore, design will be removed as well, Mr. Elliott.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I think we have all that agreed.
Thank you. So once you're ready, you can move on to the next one. Is everyone ready to proceed?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Harrison, will you introduce the Waterloo, the residential Waterloo Bankfoot item? We'll proceed to that.
Thank you, Convener. As you say, this is a planning application in principle for residential development at land 18 metres south of Bowerswell Road, Bank Foot. The main part of the application site, excluding the proposed access, is some 40 metres deep by some 95 metres in length. An additional area, which is some 30 metres deep by 70 metres in length, lies between the main site and the public road frontage. At present, both of these areas form a single area which is used for grazing. This land rises up steeply from the public road. The total area is in single ownership along with the farmland to the east. The property is called Bowerswell abuts the north boundary. A house and its garden called Hargan abuts the south boundary. Extensive farmland lies to the east and an open field to the west. It should be noted that the decision notice refers to the former local development plan policies. While the reference numbers have changed, the content and purpose of the policies effectively remains the same and has been carried forward to the current Local Development Plan 2 document. I'll just take you to the photographs now, but you might like to have page 139 available to provide you with a location plan and indicative site plan. Can also be found, but that's on page 164. I should maybe mention at this time that initially an indicative layout showing 4 house plots was submitted with the application. While the application was being processed, this plan was superseded with an indicative layout for 2 houses. Just to give you an indication of the general sequence of the photographs, we'll approach the site first of all from the south, that's the bank side, and then along the frontage of the site, and then turning round we'll approach through Waterloo from a northerly direction. Following that, we'll have an internal views of the site and its immediate environs. So I'll just take you to the first photograph now, and that provides you with a view of Fern Cottage, which, say, looking in a southerly direction, that's towards Bank Foot from Waterloo, looking towards the southeast. We then move from that position to the left, and that shows a gap between Hargan and Fern Cottage. Moving again in the next photograph to the left, we now look, as it were, up the road, approaching the site from the south, and in that you can see both Hargan and Bowerswell at the far side, and in between we have the site itself at the slightly more elevated position, the red line giving hopefully some indication that there is a division between the application site on the upper ground and the remaining ground referred to, taking us down to the public road frontage, which is indicated with a blue line. From there we travel up the road a little bit closer to the application site in the next photograph, and it just gives you, I say, a clear indication of the 2 properties and the gap in between. Again, going up the road a little bit further in the next photograph, we see the whole of the frontage of the application site, and in this one you can see the ground which is, shall we say, additional to the application site, shown outlined in blue in general terms, and the application site, of course, is upslope from that. Moving further up the road again in the next photograph, we see the approach to the access and also Bowerswell. And a little bit further up the road in the next photograph, we see a point of access that has been taken in the past into the application site. And swinging round towards the right of that photograph in the next one, we're looking back down from where the earlier photographs were, and in this one you can see the area reserved between the application site and the public road, and then the application site on the higher ground slightly to the right of that photograph. And then if we move slightly to the left in the next photograph, we catch the corner of Bowerswell and the application site. From there we swing right round and look in the opposite direction, in other words the other side of the road, and we see some of the development to the northwest opposite side, opposite the application site. From there, we travel further north in the next photograph to be able to look back down the road to the application site from the north of Waterloo. So approaching from the north, we'll now go down that road, getting closer to the application site. So in the next photograph, we just get a little bit closer, and hopefully that shows you both Bowerswell and of course Hargan and the gap in between. Going a little bit further down the road, in the next photograph, we see the point of access, and you may note here that the access is actually not formally formed. There is no drop curb as such, but it appears that the access has been taken in order to provide a facility, a drainage facility for the existing houses at Bowerswell. So, excuse me. So moving into the application site, we see that facility in the photograph, in the next photograph, and also the properties that make up Bowerswell. So from there, we go up, as it were, into the application site at a higher level. Here we are now looking in a south direction, that's towards Bankfoot, from the centre of the red line application site. And we'll now have a sequence of photographs swinging round to the right, which will show you the surrounding ground from that more elevated position. So moving on to the next photograph, we're now looking down towards the public road and the land beyond. And next photograph, we're now looking again still down to the public road, but we're now beginning to take in some of the houses I showed you in the earlier photograph on the opposite side of the road from the application site. Moving on to the next photograph, we see Bowerswell and the housing beyond on that northern side of the application site. Hopefully the red lines give you an indication of that. And again, swinging round to the right in the next photograph, we catch the corner of the Bowerswell development, but also the farmland beyond. And we're just beginning to pick up the dike which forms that boundary on that side between the application site and the farmland. So swinging round to the right in the next photograph, again we catch a little bit of the dike which forms that boundary, which is generally speaking in dead ground, as it were, when you're looking up to the site from the public road. And you can see here, obviously, somebody's grazing a horse on the site at the moment. Moving from there, we now move to the corner of the application site, looking back down that eastern bound, from the eastern boundary. We're now at the southeastern corner of the application site, and we'll have a number of photographs now swinging to the left of that to show you the application site and the adjoining property on that boundary towards the south. So swinging round to the left in the next photograph, we look across the main part of the upper part of the application site. Swinging round again to the left of that photograph, we're looking down that southern boundary from the southeast corner. We're taking in the adjoining property or some of the outbuildings associated with the adjoining property. And then swinging round to the left of that photograph again, we're looking past the, shall we say, the rear garden area of Hargan, and then beyond that in the far distance we have Fern Cottage, which was the property shown in our very first photograph. From there, from that more elevated position, we go slightly to the right in the next photograph, and as it were, down to the opposite corner on that boundary. So this is us looking east from the southwest corner, as it were, up the slope, across the land which is out with the application site, to the land which is within the application site on that boundary. We now swing round to the left of that and see the main part of the application site. This is us looking in the north from the southwestern corner, and then swing round again to the left of that photograph. We look down the ground between the application site and the public road towards Bowerswell from that lowest point of the land. From there we move up towards Bowerswell, so we look back down to Hargan. And then swinging from there, we look up the remainder of the application site just to orientate you. We swing slightly to the left of that photograph, and we see the corner of Bowerswell excuse me, and the rising ground in that corner of the application site. So from there, I'll just leave you with a general photograph of the application site as seen from the public road. Excuse me. Turning first of all in summary to the applicant's case, this proposal falls to be assessed against the Local Development Plan Policy RD3 and the associated Housing in the Countryside guidance. The applicant considers that the current proposal addresses the reasons for refusal of the previous application by reducing the number of prospective houses. As 2 houses are now envisaged, the proposal is seen as complying with Housing in the Countryside guidance as an infill development between a building group and a single house. While the officer has concerns that the gap is more than 90 metres wide, it's considered that this distance is directly comparable with the other site of similar width in Waterloo that was granted consent for 2 houses. The site is seen as having a similar landscape context as many other houses at Waterloo, which are set back and elevated above the public road. The existing houses and garden hedges, dyke and public road and roadside vegetation is considered to provide a robust landscape framework for the proposed housing development. The proposal reflects the dispersed and sporadic nature of this group of houses that have grown over a number of years. In addition, the officer's view that the proposed plot sizes bear little resemblance to the adjacent development is considered to be incorrect. As an in-principle application, there is no requirement to submit detailed plans. However, traditional building materials and a contemporary design is envisaged. The area between the application site and the public road is considered to be undevelopable. It is envisaged that this land would be used as additional garden ground. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling, during the last decade, the total area was the subject of an application for 7 houses. Then the current site was the subject of an in-principle application for 4 houses. These proposals were declined as contrary to the local development plan policies by failing to meet any of the categories and the associated criteria regarding housing in the countryside. Waterloo is not identified as a settlement in either the previous or the current local development plan. This proposal falls to be assessed against the local development plan policy and the associated housing in the countryside guidance, specifically in relation to building groups and and infill development categories. The housing to the north forms part of a building group. However, the 95-metre distance between those houses to the north and the house to the south is considered to be great to enable the development site to be viewed as lying within a building group. The proposal would extend the northern building group. Such extensions are only acceptable where the development takes place within a definable site formed by existing topography and or well-established landscape features that provide a suitable setting. The application site is assessed as not having any degree of landscape containment. It is elevated and open to view. Consequently, the proposal is considered to be contrary to this specific requirement for the extension of a building group in order for it to be acceptable. Turning to infill development as a category, infill development is supported between existing houses for up to 2 houses occupying the complete gap. In this case, the proposal is for the residential development of the land in principle. The plan showing 2 plots is indicative. The application site excludes a significant portion of the gap, approximately a third of the land. In addition, the indicative plan is assessed as failing to meet the criteria of the guidance as the plot sizes do not reflect the existing plots to the north and the south. There are few plots of comparable width and overall area in the locality. The proposal is also seen as failing to meet the requirement to avoid development on prominent skyline locations due to the detrimental impact on the visual amenity of the area. In conclusion, the proposal is not considered to comply with Local Development Plan 2 Policy 17 or the associated criteria contained in the Council's Housing in the Countryside guidance. It is noted that the applicant has compared this proposal to another approved development for 2 houses in Waterloo. These are not considered to be directly comparable, mainly because A, the gap between is approximately 20 metres narrower than the current application site. B, it is related to the full extent of the gap and did not exclude part of the area. And C, it is less elevated and less prominent in the street scene and landscape than the current site. In this case, turning to representations, there have been 4 representations and a representation from the Community Council. And these have been received and mainly concern the proposal being out of character with the locality, overlooking the visual impact of the development on this elevated land and service provision. In this case, the agent has neither requested a site visit nor a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Councillor Waters, do you have any questions for Mr. Harrison on this?
Yeah. Just trying to get a wee bit of feedback or confirmation on the topography. Can I ask just what happens on the eastern boundary? So that we've got the site which is on a obviously quite a prominent hillock or hilly area, and then there's the hedge that runs along the eastern boundary. But what happens behind that? Does the land continue to rise, or does it drop away?
Just to make sure you're talking about the farmland, as it were.
To the rear of the property.
But yes, to the rear of the application
site.
Yes. It's basically in one of the photographs. I don't know whether Audrey's able to take us back, but basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Maybe that photograph. 10 photographs back. The photograph with the horse in it.
That one.
If that helps, that would give you an indication of there's a slight rise in the land in the far distance.
Yeah.
It's sort of from the dike you see in that photograph. If you've managed to get that up, Audrey.
It drops away.
It tips down slightly and then rises up again slightly.
Right. Yeah.
Then, if you go to the photograph before that, what you've got here is a situation that the land is falling from, shall we say, the top of the application site, the highest part in the centre, is dipping down to the properties in Barrowswell. And then, as you can see, the field dips down and then rises back up again in the far distance.
Yeah. Yeah, and the 2 properties at the back of Bowerwell, they're quite a bit lower. I think you can see it better with this picture here. You can see they're quite a bit lower. And can I ask just for a bit more information on the policy, a number of policies that kind of I'd like to understand a bit better, which I think is new supplementary guidance regarding infill sites. And I know the officer expressed a concern with the amount of distance between the properties and whether that classifies as infill. It was old Council House in the Countryside guide, but I think it's now supplementary guidance.
Supplementary guidance, that's correct, yes.
Yeah, can I ask just for a bit of information of what that policy sets out, and does it give actual distances, or how from that policy are we able to look at what's too far a distance for infill and what's not for infill?
Well, I can answer your first question. There is no specific, shall we say, measured distance which says infill development will be, shall we say, if it's within this, that's that meets the criteria, or if it's 1 metre beyond that, it doesn't meet the criteria, because as with many of the guidance, it's a question of the combination of things, of which the distance would just be part. But basically, there is no fundamental change, if I can put it that way, from the previous housing in the countryside guidance that you're probably familiar with, and the revised supplementary guidance. So basically, the officer already covered some of the criteria, but if I can just maybe quickly read them to you, it basically relates to the plot sizes being comparable with neighbouring residential properties, and having a similar size of road frontage, which we don't quite have in this instance because of the gap between the application site and the road. That the proportion of each plot occupied by the new building should be no greater than that exhibited by the existing houses. So that's a plot ratio relationship. And they're saying no uses in the vicinity which would prevent the achievement of an adequate standard of amenity for the existing houses and proposed houses. So there's again a subjective assessment in terms of whether there would be a problem with overlooking and maybe loss of privacy as a result of infilling a gap. That would also be a criteria. That the size and design of the infill houses should be sympathetic to the existing houses. Well, as you only have an in-principle application in front of you, you really don't have an indication of the houses beyond the illustration. But if consent was being granted, then the applicant or whoever was taking on the development wouldn't be obliged to follow the indicative illustrations you have. I think and then the last, shall we say, advice is that what the officers referred to again, that the infilling should complete the whole area, but in terms of the gap. In other words, it shouldn't be a partial infilling of the gap. The intention is to include them in all the development. There is also a link to other criteria, the general criteria for, shall we say, siting within the countryside. So the intention is to to avoid ribbon development. That wouldn't generally be supported, although I appreciate there is always a bit of a debate as to what constitutes ribbon development, nor would it result in an extension of a settlement. Again, this really doesn't apply in this instance because Waterloo itself is not designated as a settlement. Hopefully that's of some assistance to you.
It is, thank you.
Councillor Purvis, have you got any questions for Mr. Harrison on this?
Thank you, convener. Yes, I do. The first one, I'll just pick up on the last point that you made in reference to Councillor Waters' questions about the policy and the fact that buildings as part of infill development need to fill the whole site. Can I just ask, is that, how strong is that policy? If, for example, this application that we've got forward was for the whole site, but that for the whole site, including that gap site that's between the site and the road, but the houses were still in the same place, would that then comply with that because it's within the whole site, or is it actually that the houses need to be sited there? If that makes sense.
I think I understand your question, but if I've misunderstood it, please let me know. If the whole area was treated as the application site, yes, of course, that would address the question of the whole gap being dealt with in one entity. But the converse aspect of that, if the whole site was being divided between two properties, assuming that that's what the applicant has indicated the intention, then obviously that would change. The plot sizes become significantly larger than what you have in front of you at the moment. So it would be a question of, shall we say, addressing one aspect of the criteria, but influencing another aspect of the criteria in the process.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, that does answer the question. It was more whether it's a theoretical is maybe the wrong word to use, but by having different application sites, you could achieve the policies despite the fact the houses haven't actually moved. Just on that, I think you mentioned in the papers as well that the applicant does not think that gap site that isn't within the application site is developable, but obviously as part of previous plans that had been put forward for the 7 houses or the 4 houses, that area had been included with the application site. Is there any further justification given for that, or any other grounds, or is that slightly ambiguous as to why there is that change in justification?
There's, in short, the agent doesn't indicate beyond stating that he considers it to be developable as to the, shall we say, the reasons why that may be now perceived as being undevelopable, despite the previous applications, of course, identifying that for housing. So his reasoning isn't basically illustrated in any way.
Okay, thank you. And then you've almost touched on the answer as part of your answers to Councillor Waters' questions in relation to plot sizes when you were speaking about the policies, and there's not a hard and fast rule as to 1 metre here, 1 metre there, whether it actually complies. I'm just wondering, in terms of the debate that you illustrated between the applicant and the planning officer about whether or not the plot sizes are comparable to the plot sizes in the existing Waterloo development, noting that it doesn't have a village envelope around it. Are you able to objectively assess what the plot sizes are in comparison to for this site in comparison to some of the others in that area?
I have to be slightly cautious here because I have no title to, shall we say, introduce information, but what I would draw your attention to is maybe on page 103, which the agent has submitted to give an indication of, shall we say, a variety of plot sizes within that grouping of houses at Waterloo. So that's basically what he's submitted, and clearly he's included some and maybe not included some others. So there's clearly a range of plot sizes illustrated there. I think you might have to be a little bit cautious of one of the plot sizes. That's on, shall we say, the one that extends down to the burn, as it were, there. I'm not sure whether or not that's showing a total area of what you might call garden ground, or garden ground plus a small paddock or some additional land. I'm not quite sure of the status of the whole of that one, but the other ones seem to be fairly clearly defined, and it's really just a matter of, shall we say, coming to a view whether or not you feel the plot sizes, which are shown indicatively, would be appropriate or suitable. Clearly some are larger and some are smaller, and I suppose you'd have to average them out to some extent.
Thank you. And just finally, Convener, if I may, on the question of overlooking, we can obviously see one of the developments from this angle. I think you raised as in your summary of the different arguments that one of the main concerns in relation to overlooking was the Hargan, I think it was, property. I'm just wondering, are you able to show again photos from that direction, just to get a better idea of what that looks like?
It's photographs 43 and 44, if that helps you, Audrey. Towards the end.
And can you just talk me through, so we've got the red lines there. Is the middle section of the photograph the area that is part of this gap site then? Or am I misinterpreting that?
My slight difficulty is here, I'm not actually automatically seeing the photograph that you're seeing.
Oh, okay.
I'm just trying to be sure we're looking at the same thing. The photograph I'm looking at is from the southern boundary, from the southeast corner, and it shows that boundary with the outbuildings associated with Hargan. Does that help you?
We're moving through a few, so I'm not entirely sure at the moment. Land to the rear of, oh no, the outbuilt southern boundary from the southeast corner. Yeah, we've got that one.
We've got that one. That's showing, say, the boundary of the application site and those outbuildings, and then the other one that you're referring to, which shows the ground line to the rear of that property. Next one down, which swings to the left of that, is I see it's entitled Land to the Rear of Hargan and Fern Cottage.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's helpful.
The relevant photographs.
Thank you, convener.
Thank you. If that's all the questions, I have no questions. So we will move on, and again I'll ask members, can we proceed to determine the application for review based on the information that is before us, that is information contained within the papers and the presentation from the planning advisor. Councillor Waters, are you happy to proceed?
So yes, happy to proceed.
Councillor Purvis, are you happy to proceed?
Yes, thank you, convener. I'm also happy to proceed.
I am happy to proceed, and I will take the lead on this one, as I did last time. I know Waterloo I've been through that quite a few times. It's a lovely wee gathering of houses and what was originally small holdings, which might explain that dark patch going down to the burn. I believe that's still an existing small holding. It's parodic the way it's being laid out, and that adds a certain character to Waterloo. However, if we were to give permission for this to go ahead, this application, I think that the housing that would be put on it, though it's indicative, would be out of character with what's already there. Reason being, I believe that building housing up at the top of the site, which is indicated, would make it dominant, very dominant, and obviously one can see there's not any containment to what I believe is the north of the site. I'm also not comfortable with the buffer piece of land not being within the site. So therefore, with looking at these points, I would agree with the planning department's reasons for refusal, and I would uphold the reasons of refusal. Councillor Waters, do you want to say?
Thank you, convener. I'm going to concur on what you've said. I agree with the officer's reasons for refusal. I think it's a very prominent field from its elevation in that, and I understand the applicant has put some drawings showing a potential cutaway, but it doesn't give enough information to sit and say that houses will overlook quite a considerable amount of Waterloo and affect the visual amenity. I also think it will, in reason 3 with the officers, that it doesn't respect the skyline at all within the area, and it will have an adverse impact on the visual amenity of the area. Regarding the infill, I think the houses are to the rear of the plot, which on one side at Bowerswell has houses that far back, but even the ones at the rear are considerably lower. But at the farm, there's no other houses at the rear of that the property. So it's just you know, I'm not sure whether it's infill or half ribbon development or what it is, the rear bit. And so I'm going to uphold the officer's decision with this, and I also don't think the field is properly defined to create that ability to, you know, it's just to give that, you know, a requirement for an infill proposal development going forward. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Purvis.
Thank you, convener. I think actually I'll take a slightly different view. Obviously, it's a development that Waterloo itself that has changed over time, and properties have been added, and I think it says in some cases removed or changed. The plot sizes are a wide range of different plots, and also the location of the houses, and many of them are set back from the road. So obviously this is an in principle application, but if it were to be two houses as they indicate, then I think it would comply with the housing in the countryside policy. Obviously that's a matter of judgment in terms of whether it complies with the policies on building groups and infill sites, but personally I think that it would. I also actually think that the gap site that's there, notwithstanding the discussions that we've had earlier on through the questioning, probably helps as a buffer were those two properties to be included. And having seen the photos again from different angles of the various properties near the site, I think that overlooking is perhaps not quite as much of an issue as it maybe seemed on reading some of the initial documents. So I think that I would propose instead that we overturn the officer's decision and grant the appeal on the basis that it complies with the housing in the countryside policy. I don't know whether you want me to be more specific, Colin, in terms of refuting each individual point that the officer has given as a grounds for refusal. You'll have to help me, given that I've not proposed one of these before.
No, what you've said is quite clear, that you are looking to grant, subject to suitable conditions, terms and informatives, on the basis that you believe it accords with, it would be according with the Local Development Plan 2 and the Housing and Countryside. You've referred to policy, it's not policy, it's Supplementary Guidance 2020. But you're basically saying that you're content with that and it's in line with Development Plan and Supplementary Guidance.
Okay, that's fine then. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the decision is to refuse this appeal and a majority of 2-1. To tidy up the reasons for refusal, we will put policy RD19, stroke off the apostrophe and S in Perth Council, and the local development plan is local development 2019. That would need to be changed. An S should be taken off take place on that. And again, the policies 1A and the 2. Again, there's a council apostrophe S needs to be taken out. And the site is relevant. Yes, policy 1B, B. And again, there's apostrophe and that to be taken out. And the local development plan 2, 2019 needs to brackets 2019. I think that's all the changes that's required to the reasons of refusal, unless any of the other members have anything else.
Convener, could I come in?
Yes.
on that. I'm addressing my comments to both yourself and Councillor Waters as you took the majority decision to refuse. There is one extra, I didn't quite hear you say one other change in terms of updating to take account of where we are now with the development plan. But looking at ground number 1, which in your papers was page 117,
Yes.
the first change required is council's housing in the countryside supplementary guidance 2020, and I didn't hear you mention that, but that would need to be.
Oh, yes, I missed that one out. Yeah.
And you're correct on this. The line below that is it's not RD, it's policy 19 of Perth Kinross Council, local development plan 2 in brackets 2019. Couple of lines below that, yes, there's the word place. The first word places should be singular place. And if I put on over the page 118, ground of refusal number 2, simple changes, it becomes policy 1A, Perth Kinross Council, local development plan 2, 2019. And similarly on ground 3, policy 1B, B, subdivision B, of Perth Kinross Council, local development plan 2, and then in brackets 2019. I think that would be all the update changes. Is that accord with Councillors Waters and Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, I agree with that, Councillor Waters.
Yes, I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Once you're ready to move on, Colin, because I know you've been scribing down everything, we will move on to the next one. Are you ready to go?
Yes.
Yes. Right, Mr. Harrison, can you take us on to 4.3, which is Tomanok House, Creef? I think I pronounced that right.
Yes, thank you, Convener. This is a detailed planning application for the erection of a garage with ancillary accommodation at Tomanok House, Creef. The proposal is for a 2-storey building within the garden ground of a detached house. The ground floor comprises a triple garage, workshop, carport and an access stair to the first floor. The garages would be served by an enlargement of the existing parking and turning area. The first floor would provide self-contained accommodation comprising an open-plan living, dining and kitchen area, a bedroom and bathroom facilities. It would have an external balcony on the north elevation facing away from the house. Externally, it would be finished in render and timber cladding with a metal roof. The property has farmland to the east and north and neighbouring houses to the west. And I'll take you through the photographs now, but you might like to page 201 onwards, which provides you with a location plan and site plan, plans of the existing house and the proposed accommodation building. The general sequence of the photographs will take you into the application site from the driveway and then, as it were, round the house from its frontage to the site for the proposed accommodation and then taking you around to the back of the house. So looking at the first photograph, which sees us approaching Tomanok House, we move on from there. That's the gable opposite, I should maybe mention, the gable opposite where the proposed accommodation would be being provided. We move, as it were, up the drive and over the gates and into the garden ground and look back to where we were. This is looking towards the house to the south. And from there, in the next photograph, we swing slightly towards the right. And we're looking at the adjoining buildings lying to the west and maybe also just catching the corner of the extension on Tomanok House itself on the right-hand side of that photograph. From there, we step back a little bit and also swing to the right in the next photograph and look back to both the original house we saw previously and the adjoining buildings, and again just catching the corner of Tomanok House on the right-hand side of the photograph. This is us looking at garden ground and buildings to the south and west. From there, we swing round to the right in the next photograph, and we see the frontage of Tomanok House. That's the front and east elevation. From there, we swing slightly to the right again in the next photograph, and we see the corner of the modern house, and also shown in a yellow line, we see the position of the proposed building. This photograph also shows you the general enclosure, as it were, of the garden ground and of course the farmland beyond. From there we move down, as it were, to the site of the proposed building and look back towards the blank gable of the existing house, and the approximate position of the proposed building is of course outlined in yellow for you. From there, in the next photograph, we swing slightly to the right, but we're still catching the corner of the proposed building and looking across that towards some of the garden ground that lies to the rear. And from there, we get into that rear garden ground and look back along, as it were, the rear elevation, that's the rear and west elevation of the existing house. And of course, we're catching some of the adjoining buildings we saw in the earliest photographs. From there, moving on to the next photograph, which again is slightly to the right, we swing round to see the extent of the rear garden ground. That's the western garden area associated with the existing house, and of course, again, the adjoining buildings beyond. From there, we move, as it were, down the garden ground in the next photograph, and we look back up towards the position of the proposed building and part of the rear and western elevation of the existing house. Moving on from there, back to one of the original photographs, which shows you approximately the corner of the existing house and the position of the proposed building. Turning now in summary, first of all, of the applicant's case. The applicant's review submission focuses on four main aspects. First, the proposed building is significantly smaller than and would be subordinate to the existing house and other surrounding buildings in terms of ridge height and footprint. Its width and alignment would match the existing house. Secondly, it is sited in a large mature garden area adjacent to the blank gable of the existing house. It would be out of public view and only visible obliquely from any neighbouring properties, the nearest of which being some 36 metres away. It is seen as making a positive contribution to its setting. Thirdly, the design and materials are considered to be suitable and deliberately contrast with the existing house as a separate building. It would have a low-pitch standing seam roof, render and timber-clad walls. The main glazing would face to the north in association with the proposed balcony. Fourthly, the proposal is considered to accord with and reflect the Council's Placemaking Supplementary Guidance 2020, and this document, and to quote from it, being, and I quote, purposefully different yet, and I quote again, equally compatible and complementary with the existing house. This guidance would seem to allow for a two-storey extension to the house in these circumstances. The proposal is also seen as meeting the advice concerning outbuildings and garages. Turning now to the Officer's Report of Handling in summary. In its broad context, it is noted that the land to the west is allocated for housing in Local Development Plan 2, while the farmland to the east falls within the Upper Strathearn Special Landscape Area. This proposal falls to be assessed against the current Local Development Plan 2 Policies 1A and 1BC Placemaking and Policy 17C Residential Areas and the associated supplementary guidance. These require detailed consideration of matters of scale, form, massing, design, position, proportions, and external finishes, and their combined potential impact on the visual and residential amenity of the locality. The building would have a footprint of some 13.5 by 7.5 metres. It would be some 5.6 metres to eaves level and 7.4 metres to ridge level, which is similar to the existing house. Its visual impact is seen as being localised, with no significant impact on the landscape or residential amenity of the area. However, the building itself is seen as having particularly large proportions, given that it is identified as ancillary accommodation. It is noted that the pre-application proposal was for a substantially smaller single-storey design, with the first floor accommodation being contained within the roof space. The combination of the contrast between its design and that of the existing house and the large proportions of the building is viewed as being incongruous. Also, the scale and massing is not considered to be subordinate to the host building. Consequently, the proposal is not assessed as complying with the relevant local development plan policies and associated guidance. In this case, there are no representations, and there is neither a request for a site visit nor a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you for that, Mr. Harrison. Councillor Purvis, have you got any questions for Mr. Harrison on this application?
Thank you, Convener. Just in relation to the fact that this is an in principle application, but obviously a lot of the report of handling takes into consideration the design and the scale and the size and the siting of the plans that have been put forward. Oh, sorry.
Just to clarify something there.
It's a full application.
It's a full application.
Oh, okay. You can scratch that question. Then I was looking at the wrong bit of the agenda.
Good.
No, that's fine then. That was my only question that was going to be. Okay, I've answered it myself.
So you're finished with your questioning, Councillor Purvis?
Yes, I don't have
no
anything.
other questions. Right. Councillor Waters, have you got any questions?
Just a couple of very quick confirmations of points that to the west of the site is H57, the housing development site, but there's no application in currently, according to the papers, I believe. I assume that's not changed for any houses to be built at that. But even if houses were built at that stage, because of this, the scale of the garden and the size of the garden, any development here is very likely to impact on the amenity of such a development. And to the west is I'm trying to find what is a special landscape area or some special area that's set aside as well. So there's no likelihood of any developments there either at that site.
Well, first of all, yes, I can confirm that yes, there is that allocation in the local development plan that you've described for housing towards the western side. I think you were probably meaning to the eastern side is the landscape designation, which has been referred to in the officer's submission. That's the Upper Strathearn Special Landscape Area. My understanding is that there is no say detailed plans that you could put against this particular proposal if you were wanting to make some assessment in relation to the housing site. In any event, this proposal is inevitably in front of you before the housing site, so you would have to deal with this proposal as things stand on the site at present.
That's excellent, thank you.
Mr. Harrison, I'm going to ask one question. I don't know if you've got an answer for me. Garage and ancillary accommodation, when it's such a close proximity to the host building, is there any hard and fast percentage of what the garage and ancillary building should be in relation to the host building?
In short, no, because inevitably you have such different circumstances. In this particular instance, I think it would be fair to say that the proportions of the garden are generous and considerably more generous than most people's gardens. So it would be inappropriate to, shall we say, assess it as if it was in, shall we say, a modern housing development. I think judging the application in its context is really very much what's before you today. So you have the context of, shall we say, a substantial modern house of a particular design and a substantial ancillary building immediately adjacent to it, and that's, shall we say, probably the crux of what's in front of you, if that helps. But there is no hard and fast, shall we say, measurement. It is a subjective decision on the circumstances of a case like this.
Thank you very much for that. I think that's all the questions now. So we are moving on to my little script, which members, can we proceed to determine the application for review based on the information that is before us? That is information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor. Councillor Purvis, are you happy to proceed?
Yes, convener.
Councillor Waters, are you happy to proceed?
Happy to proceed, convener.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. And again, I will go first. And again, looking at the pictures and looking at the design, and this is a full application, so one can see what is before us. And I personally feel that this is a very large garage and ancillary design, and I feel it is too large a proportion to be cited where it is. I think a more modest design would maybe be more acceptable, but certainly, as far as I can make out, this is far too large a construction in such close proximity to the host building. Councillor Purvis, do you want to debate this?
Thank you, convener. Now that I've clarified exactly what the application is that is before us, it has slightly changed my thinking when I was considering it as an in-principle one. But given that it's a full application, I think that obviously these are questions of judgment. While it's perhaps not personally what I would design and the scale that I would have if I were doing it myself, I don't think it's necessarily inappropriately. You know, we've heard from the within the policy that ancillary accommodation has to be purposefully different but equally compatible to the house, the main building, and I don't think that this deviates from that. I also note that there haven't been any objections from neighbours, and presumably they will have been notified of this. And given the other points that have been made about the fact that the building is behind the main house, the lines of sight are obscured from other areas, I don't think necessarily that we should consider the visual impact on a development that might take a long time to happen. And obviously there's a wide range of existing properties that are already in position. So given that, I think on the whole I would be minded to support overturning the decision that officers made and granting the appeal on the basis that it complies with the local development plan too.
Thank you, Councillor Purvis. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener. I don't think this affects the visual amenity or visual impact for any other residents or any other locals within the area regarding the scale of the development. It's a large house. The papers, the delegated report says it's a large house with large gardens. So in my view, and I accept some of this may be subjective, because if I can't find a reason with amenity, it comes down to whether you think it's appropriate, and with that scale, I think it fits in with the house and the garden. So I struggle to uphold the officer's decision on this one, similar to Councillor Purvis. Regarding the design and the contrast, and again it comes down to maybe a slightly subjective thing, but I think that type of thing works. I think having a more modern or a bit of timber cladding on something next to an existing building to contrast rather than trying to mimic the building exactly. I think that works as well, you know, so I have no problem. So I'm going to concur with Councillor Purvis on this one and overturn the decision and accept the appeal on this occasion. Thank you.
Thank you. So Mr. Elliott, it's by 2-1. This appeal has been upheld, and I'll let you do the usual narratives for it.
Yes, thank you, convener. I'll do it the other opposite way around. In terms of your view to refuse, basically you're largely in line with the planning officers as to the reasons for refusal, in terms of the scale of the building in particular. Yes. I don't think anything more needs to be said on that. In terms of Councillors Purvis and Waters, you consider it should be, that's a majority view, of course, is grant, and that would be subject to suitable conditions, informatives and terms. Now, on that, normally, convener, we bring in Mr. Harrison as to whether he has any comment or needs any guidance on the conditions. I should say the justification of Councillors Purvis and Waters is you both believe it accords with the with the development plan.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Mr. Harrison.
So yes.
Thank you, convener. You might like to turn to page 205, which is, shall we say, the most detailed elevations of the proposed building. It obviously indicatively shows the different materials externally that are envisaged. While it's referred to as render, we're not quite absolutely sure, is it a white render, another coloured render? Similarly, with the other details, the colour of the roof in terms of the standing seam metal roof isn't actually specified in detail there. It'd really be yourself to decide whether or not, considering it's deliberately intending to be a contrasting building with the existing house, whether you might wish to have a condition asking for confirmation of the actual details and colours of the proposed finishes.
Absolutely, Mr. Harris. That would be good to have a condition in there that asked them to come back to the planners for and give confirmation and acceptance of that.
That would be the only condition I would suggest.
Mr. Purvis, are you happy with that?
Sorry, just to ask Mr. Elliott for confirmation, is that something that would be dealt with under delegated powers, that the officers would just confirm that it meets the stated intentions and or the render?
Yes, that would be yes. It would be yes. What Mr. Harrison is doing at the moment is seeking guidance from you as to the terms of your decision, but the conditions will be formulated by officers, and of course the particular condition Mr. Harrison is mentioning about the materials being provided will be discharged under delegated powers by officers. That's correct.
Okay, I'm happy to accede to the inclusion of that then, along with Councillor Waters.
Right. If Mr. Elliott, Mr. Harrison are finished with this one.
Yes, convener, that concludes it from the legal point of view.
Yes, I have no further comments. Thank you, convener.
Thank you. Then, gentlemen, thank you all for your attendance today. This has been the first Teams or virtual LRB. I hope when we look back on it, we've all been okay. I think we've done very well personally. So thank you very much, and thank you for the IT team, etc., who put this all together. I think it worked quite well. And obviously probably have to do more of these LRBs on this level until we get out of COVID-19. So thank you all very much.